with.
You eat lunch outside or
Yeah.
something. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Welcome to Braveheart Conversations. I am Jillian Aurora, and I'm here today with the fabulous Marie Wallace.
Hi, guys. Well, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. And today we are going to be talking about the suppression of the feminine. This month in April, we are talking all things feminine. And so we're talking about feminism next week, and this week we're talking about the suppression of the feminine, and we're going to do some little history lessons. But this month is really just honoring our journey as women, not just in our individual lives, but there's a very rich wealth of history behind us that we want to honor,
and some strong shoulders that we've gotten to stand on.
Yeah, we have a lot that we owe to our ancestors for sure. A lot of women who have bravely faced a lot of oppression and a lot of violence. And so today, yeah, we're going to get the opportunity to honor them and talk very candidly. This can be a really uncomfortable conversation. So I appreciate you being willing to have this conversation, because this is Braveheart Conversations. So we do talk about some tough things here, and we know that we have a hardy crowd, right? We have a crowd that signed up for this. So here we go. You're welcome.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's jump in. The suppression of the feminine. This has been a topic that I have become so much more familiar with over the last year. It's been something that, my intuition and my inner being will just really have a mind of its own, and I will just crave a certain rabbit hole, and I will just dive in, and that has been a subject this year. And one thing has just led to another, and it's really mind-boggling to me. As a child, I remember studying a lot about religious suppression. I remember.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I remember martyrs were really, really glorified and honored. And I can remember, we didn't celebrate things like Halloween. That was, too dark, too magical, too, satanic, or whatever we thought it was. And so we would hide away in our basement, and we would watch Reformation videos.
Oh, wow.
We would watch John Huss and Wycliffe and a whole bunch of people that were murdered for being a Christian. And I remember that being a very, it was supposed to be such an example of why Christianity was the way, because so many people were willing to lose their lives for it. So I was really shocked to find all of these years later how many women actually were burned at the stake and executed. And I was never aware of this history where many, 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 many women lost their lives.
Yeah.
Simply for being a woman or being too good of a woman, right?
Too many gifts.
Too many gifts. Too good at gardening. Too good at
medicine.
Being a midwife. A lot of women held the role of the medicine man or the doctor. It was a very female profession historically. And they were the advisors. If they had political power, it was in medicine or in advising. And any women that played that role were often targeted as things shifted to a more patriarchal society. Women who were very gifted were targeted and executed and told that was actually supernatural, and it was witchcraft. And it was not playing the submissive, subordinate role that a woman was supposed to play. And the numbers vary. There aren't the records that a lot of people would like to see, but we know that somewhere between 40,000 being a very low number to, I've heard all the way up to 9 million. I'm pretty sure that that has been debunked, but generally what I see is 40 to 100,000
Yeah.
women perished in the span of a few hundred years. Um, because they were accused of witchcraft,
Mm-hmm.
which was really just that they somehow were accused of having a supernatural ability.
Intuition, probably.
Yeah, or just skills,
Skills.
knowing how to use herbs, the a really a basic thing that a lot of women gravitate towards today, right? Oh, I
Right.
use doTERRA essential oils.
Yeah.
Oh, you might be a witch.
I used
Or
crystals.
yeah, or homeopathy, or
Yeah.
a naturopathy, or any of those like more natural remedies. Even nutrition, knowing a lot about
Oh,
nutrition.
my grandmother was amazing with all that.
Hmm. And so those were the things that actually made women very vulnerable to being accused
Mm-hmm.
of something that would literally cost them their life. Or another one was women having a substantial amount of wealth,
Oh,
because
yeah.
women back in the day, we were property up to the very, very recent times. We were considered property. In fact, an interesting fact is the chattel laws. So, if you're not familiar with the word chattel, chattel means that a woman is property. She's considered chattel. And although the law that says women are chattel is no longer used, it was actually never removed.
Off the books.
So, a lot of those things changed once it was put into law that women could own property, and that's pretty recent as
Mm-hmm.
well. Um, so, when you could own property, then maybe you weren't property. I think was the way the
And there's so many
logic worked.
places all over the world where they still can't. So.
Yep, absolutely. Um, so, it's been, man, it's been a journey of a lot of grief, a lot of shock, a lot of awakening over the last year, and just really delving into a lot of history. Um, there's some phenomenal books and podcasts and um, so many resources now that talk openly about
Mm-hmm.
women's history. And um, what's sad is that women don't have a very big role in history. They're often just not mentioned, or downplayed,
Mm-hmm.
or really just considered side pieces.
Mm-hmm.
They're property.
Yep.
And so I want to talk about, how did all this begin? How did women um, evolve into that role of being suppressed? And what does that mean? And how has that impacted us? And I've done a hell of a lot of talking so far. So,
No, you're good.
Marie, do you want to add anything with like women's history and like your journey through discovering?
Well, as far as my journey, I was telling Jillian, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and there was definitely roles that we had to play. It was, these are girl chores, these are boy chores. Only we were allowed to do this. I didn't even have a credit card. I wasn't allowed to have a credit card yet. Um, because unless I was a Mrs. My name was Mrs. on the card, and I wasn't really allowed to have. But what's interesting is I was the one that made the more money in that situation. But even going back to, I wasn't allowed to feel. I wasn't allowed, because I was I'm a highly sensitive person, and so being emotional, crying a lot, having feelings, being wild and free. Like, I have pictures of me being a baby where I was just like this, like, whoa! Wild child, but I
Baby
wasn't.
Marie.
Baby Marie wasn't allowed to be that wild feminine with abandon, just love the world, compassion, and all of that. And so I think I grew up taking on more masculine roles that were approved of, right? I was allowed to be tough, and I was allowed to be strong, and but I couldn't be career oriented. I did fall into the roles that I was suggested for me. I was a teacher and I was a secretary, and those things that I was allowed to have. I wanted to be a drummer in high school, and I couldn't be a drummer because I was a girl. I couldn't be a drummer. This is like not too long ago, you guys. I couldn't be a drummer. But so that's the history I know. It's just not being allowed to be feminine because it wasn't an accepted role. And that someone had to protect me and, give me money and all of that. So I'm very fortunate that I had a job very early. And
I'm curious that when you say that you couldn't have a credit card, did the bank just literally say you're a woman, you can't have a credit card?
okay, just to be fair, I don't remember that part.
I just
know that it just
conversation-
said because I was married at the time, and they just would only put my
Your
husband's name on there.
Mhm.
So I don't know that I ever heard the words explicitly, but Marie was never on the card until later.
Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now I just look back and I think, how did those conversations go? People would be absolutely slaughtered today, and they should be.
I'm curious now, like, oh, I don't know. I don't even remember that conversation.
Yeah, man. Well, and that also speaks to how it was accepted, right?
Yeah.
Back then, you probably were like, well, that's how
Okay.
it is, right?
And you have to pool your money together, and
There's no option to have separate
Mhm.
finances or separate, separate accounts and joint accounts. They was all a joint account, right?
Yep.
Yeah, which actually has made it so terribly hard for many women to leave abusive relationships, is when they don't have that financial power.
Financial
Yeah.
freedom.
Yeah, so I'm loving that, this combination of there's like some really old history and millennia worth of women's suppression, but then also personal experiences. And
How about you?
yeah, so I came from a really religious background, and so my suppression came more from religious beliefs than, I do think that there are still some cultural remnants for sure of feminine suppression, but me specifically, I would say that my gender programming and my gender suppression has come mainly from religious beliefs, where I was very much told firmly that there was no other way for, a woman was to follow a man's leadership.
Yeah, we had that too.
I remember when I was 12 years old, this is kind of a funny story, but when I was 12 years old, I had a bat mitzvah. We were not Jewish. But we thought the tradition was cool. So I had a ceremony of me coming into my womanhood.
Mm-hmm.
And during that ceremony, my father gave me a ring that many of you may know as like a purity ring or a promise ring, saying that I would save myself until marriage, and that that ring showed my submission to my father until that submission transferred to my husband.
Oh, wow.
So it was very much that same like ownership belief that I was, even though, I didn't know the word chattel, we were still operating in that paradigm. I was essentially in that religion, and in that moment, in that ceremony, I was a piece of property. I was owned by my father to be someday transferred to the ownership of another man.
Wow. And that's not very long, you guys. She's
No.
fairly young. Wow.
I'm in my 30s. Yeah. So, and those groups still exist today. And
Oh yeah.
I remember we were pretty extreme. We believed in something called betrothal,
Mm-hmm.
which we believed was the biblical model of becoming, courting and becoming someone's wife. And so we actually believed that instead of dating and getting to know someone, that you should legally marry them first. So you're committed to them before you ever even know them, kind of like an arranged marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go through the courtship and then you have the ceremony. Thank God that by the point, I was old enough to get married, that we had loosened up a little bit of those really radical beliefs, because otherwise I may have ended up married to somebody I didn't even know.
I personally, I agree with that because when you're young and hormonal, right? And there's all these rules like don't have sex as if you were the woman, like, and there were so many rules that were separate, right? And then all of a sudden, you get married because that's
What's expected.
what's expected. So you get married, and really, you probably only just wanted the sex, right? Because you have that urge and that drive, and then you're going, oh wow, now I have to, get to know. I think that's what it was used to cut off some of those urges. But oh my goodness, it was rough. And then talking religious wise, because I've been a plethora of different things, and every religion there were these rules for the women and rules for the men, right? Especially when it was regarding sex. It's like, you know, there was one specific religion where if the guy was caught having sex, that they would just sort of get a little reprimand, and the girl was pretty much excommunicated from a church, which is the very place that she wanted to be, right? And wanted to be a part of. So you excommunicate her, and then she's left without any support or any and shamed and blamed. And I don't know. I just thought those separate rules were
Well,
like, well, that'll probably be for next
this
week,
isn't
right?
this isn't gonna earn me any popularity points, and I'm well aware of that. But actually, that is literally what the Bible says in the Old Testament. If a woman cheats or has sex outside of marriage, she's stoned to death, and she's stoned to death because of the poor reputation, the poor reflection on her father.
Oh
Not
yeah.
even, it's again going back to that ownership, and a man in the same situation is forgiven.
Yes.
So, some very, very sexist.
Well, because they have the urges and we don't. That's what I was told. It's like, right.
Yeah, there's a lot of suppression of female sexuality as well, which biologically and neurologically, as we discover now, is very much not true. Women have, they're very different than men's bodies, absolutely, but asexual, not at all.
Well, I'm sure you guys have some questions for us.
Yeah.
Do you have some questions for us?
You're
Let's
welcome.
get hairy now. I love it. I love it.
So yeah, I mean, we've touched on religion, some of my experiences and coming out of that too. I believed that women should only carry certain roles. So if I were to go to college, I was actually homeschooled all the way through. So education wasn't a huge priority.
Mm-hmm.
Learning domestic skills
Mm-hmm.
was a big priority, because as a woman, my primary role was what? It was to support a husband, or my other option might be to be a missionary. Like that was really it. And if I were to go to college, then that was still kind of seen as a waste of time and money for a woman, but that the appropriate jobs that I could take would be a teacher or a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of bucked the rules you know me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did start to really come into my own as I reached that age of, going to college. And I ended up going actually to pursue criminal justice. And I graduated with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, which is so funny and ironic to me now. Um, and then, also was enlisted. Actually, no, not enlisted. I had signed up to be an officer in the Marine Corps. And a lot of that had to do with feeling so inferior
Mm-hmm.
and feeling that if I could behave like a man, if I could do the things that a man did, then I would be as worthy or as valuable as a
Mm-hmm.
man. Because my perception, which was not incorrect, was that men were valued more,
Mm-hmm.
at least in my subculture.
Yeah.
So, even subconsciously, I was really, like, I had really integrated that idea that my gender had made me inferior and that I
Mm-hmm.
was second rate.
Can I tell you that so I actually went to college for one semester and I just wanted to be a wife and a mother. Even though I had these dreams of wanting a career, right? I wanted to be a wife and a mother, those are blessed, wonderful, amazing things. But I wasn't even allowed to really think, so I was conditioned
Mm-hmm.
so well to accept these things that I pushed down my desire for more, which obviously expressed itself later, right? Because that's what I really wanted to do. I'm so grateful that I even had a job when I was younger, and at one point, just going, I'm so blessed to have this job, because knowing what it feels like to have that freedom and to be able to express yourself and to do those things that you love and enjoy versus, yes, I had my moments. I loved being home with my kids and doing that, but I was such a better mom when I got to be both and
Mm-hmm.
so I just really suppressed that for a while, and then one day I was like, I got to bust out and be me. And I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to be a police officer. And the only reason I didn't become a police officer was because I had two children, and they put you on graveyard shifts in the beginning, and they didn't have babysitters then. But like, even in that 30, there's about 25 years difference between us. Even in those 25 years, how much, at least it's grown past that. So we're hopeful that in 25 years will be even more so. But,
Mm-hmm.
oh,
Yeah, a lot of limitations. And I think that that is still true to some degree today, where it's like there's this, you're sold this idea that, yeah, equal opportunity. You have the same abilities to do whatever, whatever opportunities guys have, you do too. Um, and yes and no, there's still a lot of lingering, you're supposed to take care of the household, you're supposed to take care of the children.
oh
And
yeah.
then if you can figure out how to fit the other things in, then that's fine. Instead of, there's two parents collaborating equally on raising the
That
children
mutual
and careers.
support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge Jamie says, I was raised with religion from my grandparents. I now, as an adult, know that is why I have always wanted to help and fix others. I grew up thinking that following the rules kept you pure.
Hmm.
But as young as age 6, I believe I remember crying because I knew what I was being taught couldn't be true. Yeah, and I can so relate to the idea of rules keeping you pure. And I remember purity was such an objective. Like that was what I was supposed to be as a
Yep,
woman.
I was
And
too.
and I can remember it being devastating when I courted a young man because we didn't believe in dating, so we had this whole other rule structure. Um, and I courted this young man, and we never even touched, never held hands, nothing. And because we had courted and then it fell apart, um, I was so devastated, not for losing him, but for losing my own purity of heart.
Oh, wow.
There was such this standard of, if you get involved with too many people, then you're tainted and no one
Hmm.
will want you. And that was so deeply embedded in me. So I thought my worth was so tied up in that. And um, that was one of the most devastating things that happened in my teen years, which I'm really grateful for. It really broke me open so that I could go, if they've said all these things and it didn't work out and I followed all the rules, what else is not true?
That's cool. That's really cool. I also want to talk about some of us, some of the people I work with too, do want to do it all. Like doing it all, giving all, being all is somehow caring and the role of the mom,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, not really.
I think
It's
that,
back to the mutual support.
well, yeah, and that old programming, the suppression that we're talking about, where we just came from a really long history of this was only women's role. Basically, she's a slave in the home. She's owned
Yeah, she
property.
didn't just get that word.
Yeah, and so she's played this role for many, many millennia, and now she's trying to both be free and not.
And she's not allowed to have desires or wants or anything outside of that.
Yeah, so I'm going to be the perfect mom and wife, and I'm going to be free and have a career. And so it holds us to this like degree of perfection that is absolutely obnoxious
And will wear you out.
And it's not realistic at
It's
all.
not.
And so yeah. We're in this weird in between, and I think we'll talk more about this as we keep going in the topics in this month, because this is a really big topic, and so I want to acknowledge that we're not going to get through it all today. But really, my intention for today and talking about the suppression is really acknowledging the history and where we came from, because I can't say how many women have sat down with me and said, I'm so frustrated because, I sit down with you and we talk about what I want to do and how I want to set boundaries and goals and whatever else. And then I don't do it, and I don't understand why. And I really believe that we have this ancestral programming that is literally in our DNA, that we are not just healing our own lifetime of this pattern. We are healing many generations before us that have operated literally in slavery, that have operated literally in being like internalizing the belief that I am an owned object. So when you come at it from that perspective and you realize I'm coming from a long history of women who didn't believe that they had personal autonomy or personal authority, it really changes how we view ourselves today. And so we get to celebrate even having any of that awareness, even coming to sit down at the table and to say, I want to do things a new way. That is an act of courage. We're not going to get it perfect, and we're not going to fully comprehend even.
Yeah, we need a lot of thinking time. A whole lot of thinking time to just sit and figure out what we do believe and where those beliefs came from. And I don't know if we're going to talk about this time, so you can remind me, because sometimes you know the order really well. What about the feminine aspects of men? Are we going to cover that later?
We will cover that later. That's a big thing. So
because it's a big topic to open up as well.
Yeah, and maybe too something that would be helpful today is just talking about what the feminine is, so that we can talk about what's been suppressed, right?
Oh, I think that's great.
Females have been suppressed, but I want to talk about maybe some of the feminine qualities too.
Vulnerability,
yeah, the emotional nature, like
having any emotions.
Yeah, and like emotions, intuition, connection, the feminine. Flow. Yeah, creativity and spontaneity and flow. The feminine is very relationship oriented. It's the being center, right? So if you think of masculine, it's the doing, it's the action. And if you think of the feminine, it's the being. And the feminine is the way that we relate to each other, plants, animals, other beings, spirituality. It's our connection. Everything connection related is the feminine. It's the depth. Um, it's the why.
Mm-hmm.
The feminine is the why for the masculine doing. So,
I'm glad we at least I defined it, because I think it's important to to start there.
so then if you think of how it has lost, in the past, it has not been a priority.
Mm-hmm.
So the priority has been the doing, the
Mm-hmm.
domination, the doing, right? And not the not the
being.
why and the being.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about the suppression of the feminine, it really is just acknowledging what should be in balance. Because it's not saying that the masculine is bad and wrong at all. It's saying that there has been a shift where one has been elevated above the other instead of honoring both, and that they are this beautiful dynamic blend. And when they are honored equally, they're the most powerful that they could possibly be.
And I would say that it's a lot of going back through history too, at least recent history, when you're talking about, um, you know, the 30s and 40s, they were just learning to get by. So there was a lot of doing there, and there was all the industrial revolutions and those things. There was a lot of doing, and so I think that's probably why it was elevated a little more. I don't know. I'd be curious about that. That just kind of came up in my head as far as maybe some of the history that might have come up for why that got elevated so much. But there's a lot of religious stuff too. A ton
Well,
of
I
religious
think
things. And
when you impose hierarchy, which is saying one thing is better than another, we get problems. Versus partnership, which we've talked about in the past. Partnership is a collaboration of the two, and it's saying one person's needs are not more than the other, one person's abilities are not superior than the other. It's partnership, it's collaboration. Versus hierarchy that says I'm boss and you must submit. I'm superior, you're inferior. That's
or what's going on with me is none of your business. I've heard that one too. It's like, wait a minute, we are in a partnership. This is mutual. It's mutual support, mutual consideration.
Yep.
We both are if we have a family and children, we're both in charge of, both all these little people, and it becomes a team. We're a team. That's the difference. We're a team.
But if you're operating from a paradigm of hierarchy, and that has not been challenged or reframed, it will make sense to someone to say it's none of your business, because they're operating from the old hierarchy paradigm. And so we get to talk about the differences, and we have, we've talked about, well, if you want hierarchy, great. That's not really what we talk about here. We talk about partnership here. And that's going to be a very wildly different approach to relationships and to life, is partnership and collaboration versus hierarchy. I want to make sure that I have touched on...
I think there's one more.
Yeah, Jamie, she says, that makes sense as to why it's so hard to set those boundaries, because something still resides in you that carries guilt or a sense that you are being mean or not caring and giving and the giving woman you should be. And this really speaks to entitlement that we've talked about before. I talk about this religiously, is beliefs around entitlement. When you are coming from a hierarchy perspective, the male superior believes that he is entitled to the woman, her body, resources, attention, time, labor, and vice versa. If you're coming from a hierarchy perspective, the woman or the submissive believes that all of her is an entitlement of him. And so she will feel guilty if she does not give of her time, body, resources, attention, labor.
Until she's depleted.
And she'll keep giving, and she will feel guilty because her core belief system is saying that she does owe those things. She owes
and
her
that she's not
superior.
Worthy.
Yeah. So
Good point.
has so much to do with with the paradigm you're coming from. Yeah, so I want to revisit just a little bit before we wrap up the history, because that is really the heart of what today's message is, the history,
The
the
paradigm.
really Holocaust that was before us. Um, I want to speak to how horrific those times were, and I would really encourage any of you to do your own research and to go look into where we came from as women. And it's often downplayed, and it's often talked about like, oh, get over it, the women's lib movement's over. I've heard so many things.
Which just further perpetuates the paradigm, right? Because if you get curious,
Yeah, but if you look back, I will promise you it is not a pleasant history. It's there's a lot of grief in it. You'll probably want to cry. You'll probably want to scream in moments. But what I found was not only were women burned and executed, a lot of women were hung, but they were often tortured for a year or more prior to their execution in really, really horrific ways. Some of the torture that methods that we have today, or that ended up being used in like the Spanish Inquisition, or against
yeah, they're
other Christians,
bad.
they started with torturing women, um, and some of the descriptions are just
Horrific.
unbelievable. Um, and just the fact that they were implemented and then left in really awful prison conditions, and a lot of them just died in prison from being so horrifically tortured. And and people who doing the torturing were told that you shouldn't look a woman in her eye, because if you had any compassion on her, that was simply a spell that she was casting on you, and you were actually being subjected to her evil.
Oh.
If you had any compassion towards a woman that you were smashing her fingers, or literally pulling her body apart, like, I mean, they're just
Yeah.
were absolutely it's eye opening, and there's a reason.
Even the sexual torture too. This is really.
Yeah,
It's so painful.
Yeah, they would look for what they called like witch's teeth or the witch's mark, or there were certain things that, and they were really degrading, because they would often try to find those things in her genitalia. And anyway, it's a dark history, and I do really believe that the truth is important to know, and even though it is hard to look at,
The only way we'll heal.
it is. And there's a reason why you start making connections to why certain words feel dangerous, or why it feels so hard to speak out. Because when you look at the context of what happened to women when they did speak out, and how literally dangerous, like physically dangerous, that was to them, I really do believe that we carry some of those remnants of trauma.
I agree.
And so we've deeply internalized the idea that it is dangerous to speak. It's dangerous to stand up for yourself. So a couple of resources that I would encourage you to take a look at and explore. There's a podcast I really love called The History of Witchcraft. And it's a very historically based podcast. It's names and dates. No, I mean, I found it incredibly really interesting, but it's not coming from like a feminist or a woo perspective. It's really just honors the history objectively. I also would really recommend the book Vagina by Naomi Wolf. I'm in the middle of that now, but it really talks about the traumatizing of women physically and how that affects their brains. Um, and let's see, are there any other? There's
the movie.
documentary.
Yeah.
What is the name of that documentary? The Burning Times,
That's
I
it.
believe. The Burning Times.
That's it.
Really phenomenal documentary. Older documentary. I really wish that we had some newer works that have come out, but I'm sure we will at some point. But anyway, those are all good places to start, I think. And then there's a wealth of information beyond that, but a couple of things that you can start your own journey in understanding the suppression of the feminine. I think that we've barely scratched the surface today, but
you'll start understanding the whys you do certain things that you do.
Yeah, I think when you start to see certain trauma triggers that maybe you didn't notice before, maybe you'll understand why they're coming up, why they're surfacing. They'll make more sense. So next week we will be talking about feminism and the different types of feminism. We'll talk about how that movement got started, how it's very widely misunderstood today.
What the real meaning of feminism really is.
Yeah. And how it is true that some aspects, some sects of feminism have gone too far and have really radicalized, but how that unfortunately has really distracted from the whole meaning, the true meaning of feminism and the place that it really has. So anyway, that will be next
future work of it that we really need.
Definitely not done. So anyway, thank you so much for being here with us today and joining in on this conversation. I know it was a challenging one. And if you feel the need to ask us any follow-up questions or contribute to the conversation or request a certain topic from here, please reach out to us. You can reach me at defytheaverage@gmail.com or Marie
at mariesgold.com.
We'd love to hear from you.
We would.
And you can see any of our previous episodes on our Facebook group, Braveheart Conversations. You can join in conversations there, or you can just check out some of the older episodes. And you can find us on a couple different podcasting platforms: Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, a couple of other ones. So please feel free to do that. And with that, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week. Enjoy the sunshine.
Yeah.
And we will see you next Thursday.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye, friends.
And go.